Good morning. The committee will come to order. I would like to begin this hearing by stating the Oversight Committee's mission statement. We exist to secure two fundamental principles. First, Americans have the right to know that the money Washington takes from them is well spent. And second, Americans deserve an efficient, effective government that works for them. Our duty on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee is to protect these rights. Our solemn responsibility is to hold government accountable to taxpayers, because taxpayers have a right to know what they get from their government. We will work tirelessly in partnership with citizen watchdogs to deliver the facts to the American people and bring genuine reform to the Federal bureaucracy. This is the mission of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. I would like to welcome everybody to this hearing. It is entitled Status Report on the Transition to a Civilian-Led Mission in Iraq. I would like to welcome Ranking Member Tierney and other members of the subcommittee and members of the audience for their participation and attendance here today. Today's proceedings continue the subcommittee's effort to examine the challenges facing the Defense Department and the State Department as they transition from a military-led to a civilian-led effort in Iraq. This is the subcommittee's second hearing on this matter. On November 17, 2008, the Bush administration and the government of Iraq signed a Status of Forces agreement which set a December 31, 2011 deadline for the departure of all U.S. military forces from Iraq. To date, the Defense Department has redeployed thousands of troops and dramatically reduced its footprint. From all outward appearances, the Defense Department seems to be hitting its benchmarks. As they draw down, the State Department is increasing its footprint. To fill the void left by the Defense Department, the State Department will hire thousands of private contractors to complete the mission. In all, the State Department's footprint will balloon to approximately 17,000 personnel. And according to the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, nearly 14,000 will be private contractors. These contractors will perform a wide range of tasks, including life support services and logistics. They will also recover downed aircraft and personnel, dispose of ordnance, and transport personnel. The State Department will also hire a private army of nearly 7,500 security contractors to do everything from guarding the walls and gates to guarding VIP convoys and flying UAVs. But while they will have the ability of sense and warn of incoming ordnance, they will not have the ability to shoot it down. I find this puzzling and I would like to discuss this further. So as the Defense Department winds down, the State Department is ramping up in what may be more of a political shell game than a drawdown of forces. When President Obama tells the American people that forces will be out of Iraq, I am not sure the average American understands that the troops will be replaced with a private army of security contractors. Nevertheless, the State Department faces a daunting and unprecedented challenge. Many have expressed doubts as to whether the State Department will meet the December 31 deadline and whether it can oversee the administration's surge in private contracting. According to the GAO, the State Department, quote, has acknowledged that it does not have the capacity to independently acquire and oversee the scale and nature of contracted services needed, end quote. The Commission on Wartime Contracting has also expressed tremendous concern. Last July, it wrote that despite interdepartmental efforts, quote, the current planning for the defense-to-state transition of vital functions in Iraq is not yet adequate, end quote. On March 1st, Commissioners Grant Green and Michael Thibault testified before this subcommittee. When asked whether the State Department is ready, they answered no. They explained that it has neither the funds to pay nor the resources to manage the thousands of additional contractor employees. Last week, 6 of the 8 commissioners testified before the full committee about billions of waste, fraud, and abuse in contracting, something in the range of $30 to $60 billion. They warned that the State Department is struggling to prepare requirements for contractors and effectively oversee them. In other words, it appears the State Department has not made enough progress to ensure a smooth transition, and I hope that has a different message to convey this morning. A commitment from Ambassador Kennedy that the State Department will be fully capable on January 1st would be a great start. On a related matter, I would appreciate if the Defense Department would clear up some confusion surrounding its drawdown. There have been numerous reports that President Obama may order thousands of combat troops to remain in Iraq at the Iraq government's request to conduct training of Iraqi military. While I understand negotiations are ongoing with the Iraqi government, I believe the American people have the right to additional clarity on how many troops will remain and what their mission and legal status will be. The Iraqi government has said that it will strip away any U.S. troops that remain next year of the limited legal immunity that they currently enjoy. No one here wants to see brave American soldiers prosecuted in Iraqi courts for defending themselves from insurgent attacks. Our troops should have the same legal protections on January 1st as they did on December 31st, and it is the President's obligation to see that they do. In only 2.5 months, the Administration must work quickly to get this done. We have a distinguished panel here today who has been very involved in this, and I appreciate each of the gentlemen for joining us here today. And I look forward to hearing from this panel of witnesses. Now I would like to recognize the distinguished ranking member, the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Tierney, for his opening statement.
Thank you. You know, our current military operation in Iraq, Operation Iraqi Freedom, as we all know, began on March 20, 2003, when President Bush ordered the invasion of Iraq. I can remember, as many of you probably do, watching it on television and seeing it when I watched with great trepidation based on the weaknesses of the Administration's case for striking in the first place. But since then, our brave men and women in uniform have fought hard to help return the country to civilian rule. After heroic sacrifice of over 8 years that cost over 4,000 American lives and nearly $1 trillion, the men and women of our armed forces can leave Iraq with their heads held high. Not so sure about those policymakers who made the decision to put their lives and America's treasure at risk. We are now ready to enter the next stage of our efforts in Iraq. In 2008, the Bush administration agreed to withdraw all U.S. troops from Iraq by the end of 2011. The Obama administration has tried to stick to that agreement and indicates that it is on track to meet that deadline. I think that is what we are going to explore here today. The State Department has been charged with the responsibility for supporting the stability and development of Iraq once the military has left. Now the task is to make sure that our military's efforts are not squandered and that Iraq's fragile stability is not lost. Let me be clear. I strongly support the drawdown of military forces in Iraq and the transition to a civilian-led mission. And I understand the extraordinary burden that this will put on the State Department, particularly since some who seem to be complaining most about the transition and whether or not it will work are the ones that voted against reducing the State Department's budget, which is sort of a contradiction in the situation. Our role today should not be to blame the State Department for the military to civilian transition that has been in process for 3 years and is required by a bilateral agreement with the sovereign nation of Iraq. Rather, our committee's role should be to press for greater management and oversight of the resources that State will be deploying in the name of the United States. This is our third hearing on the topic in the last year, under both the Democrat and Republican majorities in the House. And by most accounts, State has made important progress and is now ready to assume the mission. I want to acknowledge State for its hard work in preparing for the transition. Still, today I would like to address one ongoing concern that I have about the continuing use of private contractors in war zones. Just last week, the full committee held a hearing on the Commission on Wartime Contracting's final report to Congress. At that hearing, the Commission raised significant concerns about the future role of private security contractors who will be employed by the State Department after the military leaves Iraq. At the hearing, Commissioner Robert Henke highlighted a recently adopted Office of Management and Budget policy memo that for the first time addresses the proper role of security contractors in combat zones. The policy memo embraced a risk-based analysis to determine what functions are inherently governmental and what functions can properly be delegated to a contractor. It is an important step in the right direction. The memo continues by defining specific examples of inherently governmental functions that should never be performed by a private contractor. Notably, it found, and I quote, "Security operations performed in environments where, in the judgment of the responsible Federal official, there is significant potential for the security operations to evolve into combat," close quote, should be considered an inherently governmental function. So I would like to hear from our witnesses today, and specifically Ambassador Kennedy, about the intended role of security contractors in Iraq after the transition. And I would like you to specifically address the OMB's guidance that was cited by Commissioner Henke. In his written statement today, Ambassador Kennedy said that the Department of State will employ approximately 5,000 private security contract employees in Iraq. I agree with his assessment that this is a significant number. But beyond the number of security contractors that will be employed in Iraq, I am concerned about the specific functions these contractors will be expected to perform. For example, I understand the Department will employ a number of contractors who will be responsible for rapid response to security situations in the field, in addition to the stationary security forces who will be responsible for protecting the embassy. These rapid response forces will be responsible for emergency response, including securing State Department employees in the case of an attack. To my mind, this situation would almost certainly require the private security contractors to engage in combat. I think any reasonable person would see that to be a direct conflict with the OMB policy memo and therefore an improper use of private security contractors under that guidance. Ambassador Kennedy, I look forward to hearing how the Department plans to deal with this issue and others. I want to thank all of our witnesses again once more for showing your interest here today. Yield back.
Thank you. Members will have 7 days to submit their opening statements for the record. Now I'd like to introduce our distinguished panel. We have Ambassador Patrick Kennedy, who is the Undersecretary for Management at the Department of State. Ambassador Alexander Vershbow is the Assistant Secretary for International Security Affairs at the Department of Defense. And Mr. Alan Estevez is the Assistant Secretary for Logistics and Material Readiness at the Department of Defense. Pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn in before they testify. Please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Let the record reflect that the witness has answered in the affirmative. In order to allow time for the discussion, please try to limit your opening testimony to 5 minutes, but we'll be fairly generous with those 5 minutes. It's also my understanding the Department of Defense will issue a joint verbal statement that will be given by Mr. Estevez. I'd like to start with Ambassador Kennedy. You're now recognized for 5 minutes or a little bit more if you need it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Tierney, thank you for inviting me to update the State Department's progress in transitioning from a military-led to a civilian-led presence in Iraq, from DOD's mission to State's mission. I ask that I can submit my full testimony for the record.
So ordered.
Continued U.S. engagement with Iraq is essential. A stable and self-reliant Iraq is profoundly in the national security interests of the United States. Our diplomatic presence is designed to maximize influence in key locations: Erbil and Kirkuk in the north, Baghdad in the center, Basra in the south. State will continue the police development program, moving beyond basic policing skills to provide police forces with the capabilities to uphold the rule of law. The Office of Security Cooperation will help close gaps in Iraqi security forces' capabilities through security assistance and cooperation. Turning now to our safe and secure management platforms. We have made much progress since March, when I discussed 8 key components to launching these platforms in Iraq. My written testimony details our progress in each area. I will focus here on contract oversight and security. But first, with regard to our entire support platform, we are not struggling to award contracts. We have competitively awarded all contracts for facility construction fit-out, for security and aviation support, to stand up 3 diplomatic support hospitals, and for life support. We are mindful of recent reports, such as that by the Commission on Wartime Contracting regarding waste. We understand the extraordinarily difficult budget environment and have carefully assured prudent use of our funding. We have continued to work with DOD very closely every day at unprecedented levels. The Joint DOD Equipping Board has identified more than 3,200 pieces of equipment worth approximately $224 million to be transferred as excess, sold, or loaned to State. In the area of contracting and contracting oversight, throughout our efforts, State is always cognizant of inherently governmental functions. We contract for services that are not inherently governmental. State personnel were actively engaged with the Office of Federal Procurement Policy in preparing its new policy letter. We continue to focus on effective transition contracting, deploying experienced contracting personnel. State can surge resources to address specific contingency needs through an internal funding mechanism, which is a 1% fee charged on all contracting services. We have hired 102 additional contracting staff and support staff over the past several years and made improvements in the area of suspension and debarment, increased competition, and enhanced training. In the area of security, task orders for static and movement security have been competitively awarded for all State sites in Iraq on the basis of best value. In the past few years, State's Diplomatic Security Service has expanded its plan for oversight and operational control of private security contractor personnel. It will have more than 175 direct hire State Department personnel to administer the contract and its task orders in Iraq, ensuring contract compliance by approximately 5,000 security contract employees. These 5,000, who will cover all of our sites in Iraq to protect U.S. government staff, reflects States' continuous operation in locations where previously we would have not been able to operate. Guard forces in Iraq are like other local guards, serving as the first line of our defense for our facilities and staff. They differ, however, from our typical Guard force in that they have higher recruiting, screening, and training requirements, a higher percentage of American and third country national personnel, and specialized weapons and equipment which are necessary to defend our personnel and facilities from attack. In contingency areas such as Iraq and Afghanistan, our security contractors are under the direct management and oversight of State Department Diplomatic Security Service direct hire personnel. Their function was illustrated last September 13th during the terrorist incident in Kabul, where the embassy security elements acted swiftly to protect embassy staff and Afghan visitors, move them to safe locations, took defensive actions as directed by the Chief of Mission, and acted in concert with host nation security forces. We are staffed to achieve the operational measures and increase direct oversight to ensure professionalism and responsibility of security contractor personnel. Diplomatic security personnel at each post in Iraq and Afghanistan serve as managers for these security programs. They provide direct operational oversight of all protected motorcades in Iraq and Afghanistan. This is done for each and every one. We fully realize that the scope of our diplomatic activities in Iraq are beyond anything that we have done in the past. However, State has a history of embracing challenges. We have the competence and the personnel to mobilize in Iraq, and we have DoD's full partnership at every level, from Secretary Panetta and Chairman Dempsey to the excess property clerks on the ground. With the teams in place, our executive steering group, our Baghdad team, joint State DoD teams, and State's Iraq Transition Coordinator, we will deliver on this new State Department mission because it is in the U.S. national interest that we do so. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for inviting me and for your continued support and that of Ranking Member Tierney for the Department of State. I will welcome any questions you may have. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I recognize Mr. Estevez for 5 minutes.
Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Tierney, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. We have a written statement to include in the record that provides a more general overview of the situation in Iraq. However, in the interest of time, I would like to summarize the progress that the Department of Defense has made as it supports the Department of State during the transition to civilian control in Iraq. The Department of Defense remains fully engaged in support of Operation New Dawn and is committed to a smooth transition to the Department of State in support of the enduring diplomatic and security assistance missions in the region. We are in execution phase of this transition and are on track, and in some cases are ahead of schedule, with all the logistics functions associated with the drawdown of forces and support to the Department of State. Both the Department of Defense and the Department of State are committed to working together to achieve a successful transition. Although the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics is not responsible for establishing policy in this area, we are responsible for many of the details associated with the transition, including contracting support, maintenance and supply support, and other logistics components of the transition. As the Principal Deputy Undersecretary of Defense Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics testified on March 2, 2011, we have established a temporary senior executive steering group focused on coordinating and synchronizing the material and support aspects of the transition. Our combined Office of Secretary of Defense Joint Staff Equipping Board has addressed the individual equipment items that the Department of State has requested, which range from medical equipment to counter-rocket protection. As Ambassador Kennedy noted, to date we have identified more than 3,200 end items that are being transferred, sold, or loaned to the Department of State. These items represent 100% fulfillment of the Department of State's request for equipment support. In addition to 60 Cayman Plus mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles that were approved for loan at the time of the last testimony, the Department of Defense has since agreed to loan the Department of State 2 Giraffe counter-rocket systems and a suite of 164 biometric collection and identification systems. As of October 1, 2011, our force numbers are down to roughly 43,500. The contractor population also continues to decrease as the number of military personnel they support diminishes. We have also made steady progress in executing the plan to retrograde and redistribute equipment. Over the last year in Iraq, Joint Department of Defense and Department of State teams have executed well-coordinated plans that have synchronized the handoff of responsibilities to the Department of State at those locations where the Department of State will be the lead agency. The transition of these sites is not a turnkey operation, and each site presents its own unique set of challenges. As we resize these sites to fit the diplomatic mission, new perimeters continue to be established, containerized housing units are moved in accordance with mission requirements, utilities are being rerouted, and as required, additional site preparation and force protection materials are being installed. The Department of Defense is also providing a number of specific functions on a reimbursable basis under the authority of the Economy Act. The LOGCAP IV task order was awarded to provide the Department of State with base life support and core logistics services. This contracting mechanism is scalable and can respond to changing conditions on the ground. Food distribution, as well as fuel supply and disposition services, will continue to be provided by the Defense Logistics Agency. The Army Sustainment Command recently modified its contract for maintenance of select equipment and is providing contract services for static and movement security. The Defense Contract Management Agency and the Defense Contract Audit Agency will continue to provide administrative contract support and oversight. Again, the Department of State will reimburse the Department of Defense for all contracts and service support provided. In closing, let me reassure you that the Department of Defense is proactively partnering with the Department of State, is fully engaged in executing the drawdown of U.S. military forces and equipment in Iraq, and remains agile enough to respond to any potential changes in these requirements. Thank you for your time, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you. And I assure you that your full written statements will be entered into the record unless there's any objection. Without objection, so ordered. I'd now like to recognize myself for 5 minutes. And Ambassador Vershbow, I'd like to start with you. McClatchy newspapers, in an article came out yesterday in the Philadelphia Inquirer, the headline is "U.S. military trainers can stay," leader says. But I'm troubled by what President Talabani said. Quote, "We have agreed to retain more than 5,000 American trainers without giving them immunity. We have sent them our agreement to retain this number and are awaiting their response, yes or no," end quote. I find it deeply troubling that there's the prospect of our troops being in Iraq without immunity. I think this is totally unacceptable. Can you please give us an update on the situation?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to respond. Indeed, there are some important issues raised by that article. First of all, Iraq's political leadership has indicated that they are interested in a training relationship with the United States after 2011, and we very much want to have an enduring partnership with the Iraqi government and people, and a relationship with the Iraqi security forces would be a very important part of that relationship. I think, as you know, we have long been planning to have the Office of Security Cooperation Iraq, OSCI, which would be under Chief of Mission Authority, serve as the cornerstone of a strategic security partnership, and it would be the hub for a range of security assistance and security cooperation activities. So that, of course, is the baseline. We've been reviewing the official statement issued by Iraqi leaders on training assistance on October the 4th, and discussing with them how this fits into the principle of security cooperation under the 2008 Strategic Framework Agreement. I should add that we appreciate the democratic spirit displayed by Iraqi leaders in debating this important subject, and we will continue discussions with our Iraqi counterparts in the days ahead. So these negotiations are ongoing, and it's premature to discuss what any potential training relationship might look like.
Well, will our troops have immunity, yes or no?
Yeah, I'll get to that issue, Mr. Chairman. But as we work to define the parameters of what it will look like, the issues raised yet again in this article regarding status protections, of course, will be an important issue. Again, I don't want to get into the specifics of the negotiations, but we will always ensure that our forces have the appropriate protections that they need when they're deployed overseas. There's a number of different
when you say appropriate protections, is that immunity?
I think there's different terminology implied.
Yeah, that's why I'm seeking a little clarification here. I'm not feeling too comfortable at the moment. Will our troops have immunity?
They will have the status protections, which has been defined under the strategic framework, under the security agreement, excuse me, the status of forces agreement that now applies, as indicating that our forces would be subject to U.S. law rather than Iraqi law. So we will be looking for something going forward that provides the comparable level of protection. Exactly how that will be achieved, again, is a subject of ongoing negotiations. Some of the personnel, as I mentioned, under the OSCI will be covered under Chief of Mission Authority. The question that's still being discussed is whether any additional personnel would be involved and how they would be protected. We certainly take very seriously the concerns you've expressed.
Let me move on. I think this is a major point of concern. It's obviously a major point of difference. It's something that obviously must be resolved. I think it's totally unacceptable to think that our troops would be there without immunity as they've enjoyed currently. Ambassador Kennedy, let me go back to these lost functionalities. Last time we gathered together, we referred to this July 12, 2010 Commission on Wartime Contracting Special Report. It talked about the lost functionalities. This was on page 4 of that report. There were 14 specific security-related tasks now performed by Department of Defense that State must provide as the military draws down. I know there had been progress on at least 7 of those, but could you give me an update as to, of those 14 specific ones, what are you not prepared to take care of?
Mr. Chairman,
if you could hit the, sorry.
My apologies. Mr. Chairman, as we outlined in my June 8th letter to the committee, we believe that we have covered the functions that are absolutely essential to our operations there. We will have the ability through the
would that be all 14 of these?
I think you can say we will have the ability to do everything except, for example, the recovery of downed aircraft. Should an aircraft go down, we will be able to move to recover the personnel from those aircraft. But whether we will, because we don't have quite the heavy lift of the Department of Defense, we may not be able to recover the airframe itself.
So of the 14, that's the only one that you're concerned about?
I am concerned about everything possibly going wrong.
Right.
I mean, I cannot.
But functionality.
But functionality, going, if I could, Mr. Chairman, to your earlier, in your opening statement, you ask about counter-battery neutralization. We will have the ability, thanks to my colleagues in the Defense Department, with a system that is called Giraffe, which is an early warning system that tracks incoming rockets or mortars, gives us sufficient warning to deal with that. That we'll be able to sound the alarm. And in the construction activities that we are undertaking at all the sites that our personnel will both work and live, we are constructing overhead cover that means should one of those missiles or mortars strike one of our facilities, and this has happened in Baghdad, and the construction techniques we have been using in Baghdad have proven very, very effective, there is no penetration of the building itself.
But can we or will we fire back?
We will not, no, sir. The State Department has no howitzers and no counter rockets fired. We will not fire back. That is not a diplomatic activity. We now have a diplomatic mission in Iraq, not a military mission. But if I might add, we are partnered extensively with the Iraqi military and the Iraqi police, who have been assisting us during the last few months. We have been without such a counter battery fire ability, and the Iraqi police and the Iraqi military have been great assistants of disrupting the attempts of forces to attack our facilities via rockets and mortars.
Well, God bless the men and women who are going to continue to be there, because if it's the policy of the United States not to fire back, I have deep concerns. We'll continue to discuss this. I've been very generous with my time. I now recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Tierney.
Thank you. Ambassador Kennedy, will you describe or compare for me what a normal State Department deployment to any particular country would be and how that stacks up against what you are going to be doing in Iraq. So take a non-conflict area and talk about size of operation for a comparably sized and populated country and how the missions are going to vary.
I think, Mr. Tierney, that in terms of the personnel deployed to do, I will call it substantive and basic administrative and logistic work, our embassy and consulates in Iraq would be comparable to a similar country. What is different in Iraq is the additional layers of security, medical, and life support that we have to provide there, because our people cannot go shopping on the outside. There is an active and ongoing threat to life and limb. So we have taken a package that is necessary to conduct the State Department's mission. There is obviously a police training component, which does not exist in every country. And then we have added security, medical, logistics, and life support that is appropriate for the situation on the ground in Iraq. But we very much believe, and we think we are seeing evidence, that that supplement, so to speak, will be able to be withdrawn measure by measure over time as the security situation further stabilizes and as we are able to obtain more goods and services on the local economy.
How many locations or locales will State Department diplomatic personnel be located at?
At 4, Mr. Tierney.
Widely disseminated around the country, or closely knit? Or
they will be in the north in Erbil, where we have 2 closely linked sites, in Baghdad, where we have our embassy, 2 other compounds literally right across the street, a police training compound on the other side of the river, and a logistics hub at Baghdad Airport. We will have a small consular presence co-located with the Office of Security Cooperation in Kirkuk, and then we will have a consulate general in Basra in the south, sir.
Okay. And there will be convoys, I assume, going from one to the other from time to time?
There will be supply convoys. Our plan is to conduct those movements via air.
All of it via air?
Obviously, except the ones across the street, and the road to the airport is very often safe, so we would be able to. But we have an aviation capability, thanks to the Congress's assistance, that will enable us to move personnel via either fixed wing in from Amman or Kuwait, and the long distances, Baghdad up to Erbil, Baghdad down south to Basra, and then we have distributed helicopter rotary wing capability in order to move our personnel, should it be required, between nearly placed locations.
You're essentially going to have no ground convoy security issues.
Well, obviously there are some movements within Baghdad or in outside of the compound in Basra where, yes, there will be security issues, which is why we have turned to our colleagues in the Department of Defense, and they have been providing us on loan with mine-resistant transport vehicles, sir.
Who's going to provide the security, the human security, for those convoys?
That security will be provided by contractor personnel, but each one of those movements with contract security personnel, each and every one of those will have a State Department diplomatic security officer in the convoy who is the agent in charge, using security parlance. He or she is in charge. They give the orders. The contractors only respond to the orders given by the diplomatic security Federal employee.
Has there been any thought given to taking State personnel from other locations around the world and locating them in this conflict-likely area and instead using the contractors elsewhere?
We have analyzed that, sir. I have a grand total of 1,800 diplomatic security special agents and about another 100 security professionals in my entire staff. If I would have to strip the entire world, and given what we all know to be the threats against United States interests around the world, plus my requirement to protect the Secretary of State, distinguished foreign visitors to the United States, and enforce the passport and visa laws of the United States. I simply do not have it. I have stripped to 175 to make sure that I have professionals overseeing the contracts as a whole, and then a State Department direct hire professional in each one of those convoys.
Now, the Secretary of State has written members of Congress indicating a concern for proposed reductions in the State Department's budget. If those reductions are enforced, will that impact your ability to hire and train additional people to perform that function?
It will, sir. We know that we have this mission. We have been, I think, as judicious as possible, as streamlined as possible, borrowing and receiving transfers of equipment from the Department of Defense. But if the President's budget request is not enacted, we will have a severe difficulty maintaining our task presence there in Iraq and in Afghanistan and Pakistan and worldwide, for that matter, sir.
I'll yield back for now, and there will be another round, I assume.
Thank you. Going back to Ambassador Vershbow, let's talk about the number of U.S. troops. What the Iraqis are requesting or authorizing, how many is the President authorizing?
Mr. Chairman, no decisions have been made. Discussions are still ongoing on the nature of the relationship, from which would be derived any.
So the number of 3,000 to 4,000 troops that we hear, is that accurate or inaccurate?
As I said, there's a lot of things going on in these discussions which predate the announcement of October 4, when the Iraqi leaders took the position that they've taken regarding no immunities. So obviously the discussions now have taken on a different dimension. So beyond that, I really can't say, because nothing's been decided. The shape of the relationship will be determined in part by how this issue of status protections is addressed. So it's a work in progress. Even as we speak, discussions are taking place between our ambassador, the commander, General Austin, and Iraqi leaders. So it's really difficult to give you more than that today.
Now, there was a report that General Austin had asked for between 14,000 and 18,000 troops. Is that true?
Again, I can't comment on internal deliberations. A lot of different ideas have been bounced around in the course of the last few months.
Do you know what the actual request was?
The military leadership was asked to provide a range of options, and they've done that, and that was the basis on which we engaged the Iraqis, and now the discussions have...
Do you know what General Austin requested?
I can't talk about that in an open session, Mr. Chairman. It's classified.
Fair enough. When do we have to make this decision? I mean, I guess it's the end of the year, right? Is there a particular timetable to this?
Well, there's no absolute deadline. And right now we're on the trajectory that was established by the agreement by the previous administration in November of 2008 to draw down all of our forces, which are now around 43,000. And then move in 2012 to the Office of Security Cooperation in Iraq, which would have 157 U.S. military and DoD civilian personnel, and additional security assistant team contractors supporting specific FMS cases. The discussions that are going on now relate to what potential additions to that presence would be agreed. Whether that would be before or after the end of the year remains to be seen. But obviously the discussions are ongoing. It might be simpler to reach the agreement before all of our forces have left, but we're talking about an entirely different relationship in either case. And
all right, thank you.
Again, I cannot predict when these discussions will close.
Ambassador Kennedy, let's talk about these hiring up of all of these contractors. When we get to January 1st, based on where we're at here in October, where are we going to be on the staffing levels? Are we set to hit 100% of the goal? Is it? If you can clarify that a little bit for me. And there are obviously different categories. The security is maybe a little bit more important, but food service is going to be equally as important. So where are we on that spectrum of being able to accomplish that goal?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have awarded contracts for all the services that we require in Iraq at all the installations, and those contracts, task orders, have been awarded. The contractors are in the process of mobilizing. The medical contractor, for example, is already mobilized. The aviation contractor is already mobilized. The life support contract has been awarded, thanks to my colleagues at the Department of Defense, awarded on our behalf, and a contract that we will fund. That contractor is mobilizing, and it is in fact a contractor the DoD has been using at all the sites that we will be engaged in except 2, and that is well on the way. We believe that we will have no problem in those support services areas being fully staffed, fully supportive of our personnel before December 31st.
Thank you. We talked about the hospital. You mentioned the hospital or medical needs. There's been some concern that there won't be the capacity to deal with a mass casualty event, that the medical facility at the Baghdad International Airport will have the capability only to handle 6 patients overnight. Do you have any concerns of that?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I do have a concern, but I also have to operate in the realm of reality. We do also have a medical unit at the American Embassy compound downtown. It is not a hospital unit staffed with surgeons as the one. We also, though, sir, because of our aviation capabilities, have the capability of quickly transporting personnel who have been stabilized but need further surgery to locations such as Jordan, Kuwait, Turkey, or all the way to Europe should it be required. So we believe we have put into place a layered system that would be able to deal with what we foresee as the facts on the ground.
Thank you. I'll now recognize Mr. Tierney.
Thank you. Ambassador Kennedy, the protection for the logistical contractors in various functions that they're doing, whether it be kitchen help or people over at the police training area, stuff like that, is that also going to be provided by private contractors?
Yes, sir. That is within the number of 5,000, which is approximately 3,500 static perimeter guards around our facilities and 1,500 movement personnel.
Will they be getting a similar type of state employee or security personnel supervision?
Yes, sir. The Diplomatic Security Service will control both the static guards and the movement guards.
Who specifically is going to be training the police on that, and under which program?
That is under the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement police training program under Assistant Secretary Brownfield's leadership.
So it's a combination of state personnel and go ahead. No, please.
It's a combination of State Department personnel and some contract trainers for some activities.
Has there been any consideration to doing out-of-country training of these police personnel?
There has been some consideration of that. I will have to get back to you, sir, with more details. What we're trying to do is do a large number of people with sort of second echelon. The Bureau of Narcotics and Law Enforcement and my DoD colleagues have done a great job in training the police on the beat. This training is in effect advanced training, and we believe that one of the most important locations to do that is at the Baghdad Police College, which adjoins the training center that I mentioned.
If you've done an analysis about the benefits or possible benefits of out-of-country training of that nature by the United States personnel or by a combination of international personnel, I'd like to see it if you could.
I'll ask Assistant Secretary Brownfield to get that to you, sir.
So who's been vetting and training the private contractors that are going to be providing security?
State Department Diplomatic Security Service runs background investigations on every single one of these individuals. They are given, sir, what are called public trust clearances, which is the equivalent to a secret security clearance, although they do not have the need to know. But it's the same rubric: police checks, national agency checks, interviews, vetting, records checks. So we feel very, very comfortable that the individuals we are engaging to do this security work are of the highest standard.
The Wartime Contracting Commission basically indicated they thought that there should be consideration given to the operational, the political, and the financial aspects or risks of contracting functions on that. I'm assuming that you were precluded from doing that because of the limitations you had in personnel. You simply had to spread your people thin to manage and supervise contractors and really didn't have the opportunity to weigh in on those other factors of risk.
Well, sir, there are two parts to that. I mean, obviously, there is personnel and resources. I only have 1,800, as I mentioned. But I try to take a holistic approach. What I see are requirements in both Iraq and Afghanistan, if I might add that. This is a surge. This is not a permanent requirement that I see the Bureau of Diplomatic Security having to rise to adding 5,000 additional personnel for the long haul, the number we will have in Iraq. I see this as a surge. The State Department, other government agencies have always dealt with surge requirements by turning to contractors. To hire someone, to promise them a 20 or 25 or 30-year career when we don't see the need for their services out beyond 3 to 5 years, just citing that as a factor, would saddle the State Department and the American taxpayer with a level of personnel that is not in the best interest.
Well, that would be one of the considerations I assume that they would want you to measure. The other, of course, would be the potential of non-State Department or non-Defense Department people performing an act or taking on some activity that totally puts the country at risk or makes some political situation untenable.
That is entirely possible, sir. But that is why, though, all of our personnel, whether they're static or movement, act under the direct supervision of diplomatic security special agents or security protective officers, who are all direct hire.
What contingency plan does the State Department have if facts on the ground change substantially enough that it's no longer feasible to have private security contractors in use?
I think that, and that's an option that I have thought about. I can't speak to my colleagues. I think, though, that I would have to report to the Secretary that we would have to severely scale down our operations in Iraq. I have even done an analysis based upon an old General Accountability Office study on the number of Federal law enforcement personnel in the entire Federal service. And even if I took 10% of the Bureau of Prison Guards, I would not have enough static officers there, and the Bureau of Prisons might have some comment on that. So I believe that these professionals that we engage, that we vet, that we write the syllabus for their training, we spot check their training, we direct their performance, hands-on, eyes-on. I believe that that is the way that we should go. But
the plan is, if it becomes untenable, then there is to scale down operations as opposed to just keep hiring more and more contractors.
Well, if I'm sorry, I apologize. I thought the predicate.
Assuming things on the ground change, it becomes so violent over there.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant that I could no longer keep contractors there for some.
Right. That's my point. Is that it comes to the point where the contractors aren't feasible to operate. When you've made the analysis on that, it's not to just keep loading them in, hoping that things are going to change. It's to scale down operations.
I think we have in our plan sufficient contractors to provide perimeter security and cooperation with the Iraqi police and military.
I know you do, but contingency plans are for when that doesn't work. And then I think I heard you say that you would recommend the Secretary scaled back.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Yield back.
Mr. Estevez, do you have a dollar figure or estimate of what assets will be either turned over to the Iraqis or left behind? It's your microphone, please. Microphone.
Sorry. Apologize, Mr. Chairman. There's a couple of different programs that we have for turning things over to the Iraqis, including foreign military sales. So they're buying military equipment from us, which is not left behind. That's basically new equipment, though there are some things that they've purchased from us.
What's the value? How much they purchased?
Well, I'm trying to give you a couple of different programs here. So under what we call foreign excess property, That's $320 million, $321 million to date. That will go up as we continue over the next 3 months to draw down.
And that's where the Iraqi government pays the U.S.
That is, we give it to them.
Do we just?
That is because the cost-benefit analysis is we don't need this stuff. It includes T-wall barriers and generators that don't work in the United States and vehicles that aren't up to U.S. vehicle code. And the cost-benefit analysis says we save $600 million in not transporting that equipment back to the United States, where the military doesn't have programs to sustain that type of equipment.
We didn't try to trade it for something, or we're just handed it to them.
It's in our benefit to help them build their capability so that their military and their security forces can sustain, and that they're.
But these aren't all military assets.
No, again, we're talking about generators, housing, air conditioners, TVs, things like that. And before it goes to the Iraqis, we have processes that are for the United States state, and then if the state of Utah wants that, they have capability to say, we want that, and we'll
sign us up.
You're playing. You are playing. You just have to pay the transportation back to the United States for that piece of equipment. I don't think I have the dollar value of what we've given them under what was 1202 authority, which was authorized by Congress to provide them with, again, equipment that they need to build up their military capability, again, so that we can depart and they can sustain themselves for their internal security and eventually for external security for the nation. I do have a number of pieces.
Is there a way to look at the list of the assets if you say, hey, the state of Utah, if they want it, you can come get it?
We've put that process in place, sir.
Process in place, I mean.
So that before we turn something over, we say, here's the list of equipment at Base X that we're turning over to the Iraqis. And there's an organization called National Association of Surplus, it's NASAP, that screens that. The state of Utah says, I'm looking for a generator for a hospital. They say, there's a generator available. Here's how you get it back, and that becomes available.
We don't have time in these few minutes, but if you could help clarify both the dollar value, the assets themselves, and these programs, if they're available to states or municipalities, whatever they might be, that would be helpful.
I would be happy to do that.
Do you have is there a grand total number of the assets that we're leaving behind?
So that's that number.
Right.
There's about 50,000 other pieces of equipment, basic military equipment, that we have provided to the Iraqis, again, under congressional authority.
Do we have a dollar value of the 50,000
pieces? I do not have the
pieces?
dollar value on that, but I can get you the dollar value on that.
I'd appreciate that.
For the record. And let me see if I can give you the number that we've given to the states. I do have that somewhere in my records, but I will get you that as well. Other than that, nothing else is being left behind. We are retrograding other than those type of pieces of equipment that we really don't need anymore. The process is that if it's needed in Afghanistan, it goes to Afghanistan. If it's needed somewhere else in U.S. Central Command, it goes there. Most of the equipment there belongs to the units that we deployed there, and when they return, they carry that back with them to the United States.
The logistics of this must be amazing. If you could please keep looking for that number. Let me go back to Ambassador Kennedy here. I want to talk about the $481 million is my understanding for the interim consular posts. These are interim facilities, right? They're supposed to last 3 to 5 years. This would be in Erbil and Basra, as opposed to building more permanent type structures. I know there was a congressional funding issue here at play. The concern is that spending $481 million on what it would be an interim facility that's only going to last a few years.
Mr. Chairman, I'll get you a specific breakdown of that figure. We are being as minimalistic as possible. We are reusing T-walls. The sites we are using both in Basra and in Erbil and in Baghdad and in Kirkuk are all former U.S. military troop sites. So we are using equipment that they are transferring to us on another one of the programs you were just asking my colleague about.
Am I off on the number, though, the $481 million, 2 facilities?
I think that number includes things that artificially inflate the number, and I'll give you a piece of paper on that, sir.
Fair enough. I'd appreciate that. Last thing I want to discuss here is what's happening with Iran and their presence there. We've had previous incidents with Iranian-made missiles being fired at us. What do you see happening right now? It appears as if they're just laying low, waiting for January 1st to come about, and the concern is that they're going to step these things up and start to go after our 17,000 personnel there. What's your assessment of the situation?
My assessment, Mr. Chairman, is that Iran does not wish to see a stable, democratic Iraq as a linchpin of a new way of doing business in that part of the world, and they will go to significant extremes to disrupt our efforts to assist the government and people of Iraq to achieve the democracy. They have a fledgling democracy. It is building. It will take a while to build the democracy, as I think as we know from our own country. So it is in the interest of the Iranians to disrupt our efforts, and I believe that they will continue to do so.
How do we defend ourselves, right? Basically, we're taking a position that it's going to be our policy to just duck and cover without the ability and the opportunity to fire back. How capable do we think the Iraqis are going to be to actually go out and take out the threat, or somebody is actually continuing to fire upon an embassy, for instance?
Because of the excellent training and joint operations that our military has been conducting with the Iraqis over the last few years, I believe, and I could ask my DoD colleagues to comment on, I believe that the Iraqi capabilities are growing significantly and continue to grow.
Are they adequate?
They're certainly not up to U.S. military standards, no, sir, but it is an effort that is on the upswing. I believe that they are cooperating with us. The Iraqi police are working with us, and I believe that we will be able to accomplish that over time.
I guess I'm concerned about January 1st, which isn't too far around the corner. One of these letters from Joseph McManus, Acting Assistant Secretary of Legislative Affairs for the Department of State back in July of 2011, in the comments said, quote, "Although the competency and capabilities of the ISF have improved in recent years, they are generally capable of providing internal security for Iraq. They still face specific capability gaps and continue to operate in an uncertain security environment." End quote. This is just an ongoing concern. We think we can expect the expansion of Iran's presence there to try to disrupt what's going on, and I don't know how we would defend ourselves against it.
Well, I believe, Mr. Chairman, that our continued cooperation with Iraqi officials, the Iraqis want to have a democracy in Iraq. They do not want to be a satellite of Iran. There was a very, very bloody war that took place several years ago between Iraq and Iran. So I believe that we can count on the Iraqis to pursue their own self-interest, which is to maintain a free, democratic, and stable Iraq, and we need to partner with them in that endeavor.
Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you. Ambassador, of course, one of the tools that, as a diplomat, you'll recognize that we're not using with Iran in this situation is diplomacy. And I think that might have some limiting effects on our ability to try and bring some order to what's going on in that part of the world, and something for us all to consider. I won't ask you to comment on it because you're a diplomat, and I know what your answer will be. But certainly I think it's something that we should think about in terms of having all of these people that are so well trained as diplomats and then just not use one of the tools in our arsenal on that. Mr. Estevez, can you tell me how much money the Department of Defense will no longer have to spend in Iraq once the transfer is made over to State on an annual basis?
I cannot, sir. I'll have to take that for the record.
Mr. Birchfeld, Ambassador Birchfeld, do you have any information on that?
I don't have the numbers in front of me, sir. We'll get back to you.
I know Ambassador Kennedy does then, don't you?
figures that I have seen, Mr. Tierney, say that the difference is approximately $50 billion a year by the Department of Defense versus an estimated $6 billion a year for the Department of State. I think that's a significant shift in mission. I think it's a significant reduction in funding.
And I know we had discussed it before. That's why I thought these gentlemen had. I wanted to make sure they had an opportunity to say it if they knew it was otherwise on that. This $6 billion the Department of State has, are you now forced under your current budgetary situation to take that from other Department of State activities, or have you received adequate funds to plus up for that amount?
Mr. Tierney, in the President's budget request for fiscal year 12, the State Department budget is presented in two segments, a regular budget and an overseas contingency operating budget, which is a parallel to what the Department of Defense has used for many years. If the President's budget request is enacted as requested, meaning both the regular budget and the contingency operating budget, we would not have to draw funds from the regular to support the contingency operations.
And what would happen if the House budget, as it passed the House, were the effective operating vehicle?
At an 18 to 20% cut to State Department operations, I literally, even though it is my responsibility to plan for contingencies, my pencil can't get there, sir.
But I think it's reasonable to assume that if we want to fund the $6 billion for your operation in Iraq, it's going to come from somewhere, which means other areas that are already underfunded will be drawn down.
Absolutely, sir.
Are you knowledgeable of any USAID activities that will be continuing on in Iraq?
Mr. Chairman, I know that AID will continue to operate in Iraq. There is funding requested in the Foreign Assistance Program for them. Frankly, sir, though, I'm not an expert on the AID programs. I know that we are making provisions, I and my colleagues, for the platform on which AID will have a presence in Iraq.
That's what I was getting at. And the security for AID will be through you or directly on their own hires of?
No, sir. They are since they are under Chief of Mission Authority, their security will be provided by the Diplomatic Security Service. Okay.
And what steps have you taken in the State Department to deal with the issue of debarment and suspension? And I note that first Kuwait couldn't get debarred when there was a little doubt that it should have been. So how are we improving on that situation so contractors will at least know that there's some bite when they violate?
We have just, working with the procurement executive at the Department, he has just issued a new State Department procurement, what's called a PIB, a Procurement Information Bulletin, that increases substantially our ability to follow up on the Commission on Wartime Contracting's recommendations, not in this report, but in previous ones. And we will be able to, I believe, provide a greatly upgraded ability to suspend and debar under the program we've set forward. And I'd be glad to send up to you and your staff a copy of our new program.
Thank you, Ambassador. Lastly, what measures is the State taking to ensure that you're going to have adequate oversight of the log cap for when you take over the contract, and how long do you think that's going to last? Will that be your vehicle after 2012?
I think it'll be a vehicle for more than 1 year. Yes, sir. We realize that this is a major activity. Someone took a quote of mine or one of my colleagues totally out of context, saying that the State Department does not have the resources to oversee the Log Cap 4 contract. That is entirely true, but there was a semicolon there. And that is why we, on a reimbursable basis, have engaged the Defense Contract Audit Agency and the Defense Contract Management Agency as our partners in overseeing the Log Cap contract. It will be fully overseen and fully audited. We're just using professionals from the Department of Defense who have the career-specific talents and abilities to do that kind of life support contract, which we don't. I would never have engaged in that route unless I had an agreement with DCMA and DCAA to provide us on a reimbursable detail the oversight that is required.
Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you. Now I would recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Quigley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador Kennedy, you just touched briefly on the debarment issue, but we have years of frustration to counter a report that promises hope as we finish our activities, the report you just referenced to Mr. Tierney. So we'll just use a few examples of the frustrations that we might face here. The first Kuwaiti General Trading and Contracting Company, as an example. You recall being here 4 years ago in 2007 before this same committee. We were talking about the construction. They were the prime contractor to build the State Department embassy in Iraq. Cost overruns of $144 million, labor abuses, and what we now know, a kickback scheme involving hundreds of million dollars of U.S. taxpayer dollars. Despite all these problems, the State Department has allowed First Kuwaiti to continue to operate around the world, including Saudi Arabia and other countries. If you can't deal with that after all these years, what gives us any hope that debarment suspension will have some sort of effect because there's a new plan?
I don't want to debate specific numbers with you, sir, because I'd like to sit with you and discuss them. But there were not cost overruns of $146 million, nor am I aware of a huge kickback scheme for First Kuwaiti related to State Department activities amounting to hundreds of millions of dollars. We monitored that, I will admit, in building the American embassy in Kuwait. The then Director of Overseas Buildings used a construction oversight model which did not deliver everything that I would have wanted if I had been the Undersecretary at that time. That model has been changed. On your point about the State Department, outside of the contract in Baghdad, has never awarded a contract to First Kuwaiti. The references you made to Saudi Arabia and also one in Indonesia were awarded to an American company registered operating in the State of Maryland named Grunley Walsh. They subsequently sold to another American company called Aurora, who utilized First Kuwaiti as a subsidiary of theirs. But our contract,
well, doesn't that seem as an obvious way to get around?
I'm not a lawyer.
I mean, the fact that they can actually use them anyway, it's semantics that you're getting into at this point. Saying, well, we didn't actually do it, somebody else did. Well, the fact that they're allowed to gets to the point. And I'd love to have the private debate that you encourage about the problems that existed with First Kuwaiti.
I would be glad to call upon you, sir, and I will seek an appointment. But I do believe we have no plans to use First Kuwaiti ever again. The problems that arose in Baghdad were, in effect, almost parallel to the awarding of the original contracts for Surabaya and for Jeddah. And the problems were unearthed along the way, and the contract was already in place with the American company. And we have put additional monitoring personnel on those, and because of the potential cost to the American taxpayer of stopping a contract in the middle and breaking it and then trying to restart it, we have been moving very, very expeditiously. The contract in Jeddah, in fact, is suspended. There is no work. I have halted work on that in First Kuwaiti. And they are at 99% complete.
Were there problems or not? I mean, why would you think about stopping a contract in the middle if there weren't any problems? What were the problems?
The problems came out in Baghdad and in Surabaya and Jeddah, in effect, simultaneously.
What were the problems? If I had it all wrong, what were the problems more specifically?
Poor management on site, on scene.
But what? So the poor management created what problems?
Time delays and work that we have State Department construction engineers and architects on site, as I think in the buildings trade is called the owner's representative, on scene in Jeddah and in Surabaya. Those representatives were constantly requiring work to be stopped and work to be redone at the contractor's expense, not at ours. and that is the poor performance leading to seeing a product that was not headed in the direction that we wanted, and that's why we have representatives on site who can tell the contractor that wiring, that wall is not built according to the specifications in the contract and the bid documents. You tear it out. You get no additional funds for correcting your errors.
I've run out of time, but can you quickly tell us how many contractors has the State Department suspended or debarred in Iraq?
Suspended or debarred in Iraq? I don't have that number at the tip of my tongue. I will get that for you.
Could you get it to the full committee?
Absolutely, sir.
Thank you, Mr.
We'll
Chairman.
address it to the Chairman.
Thank you. Gentleman yields back. Recognize Mr. Tierney.
Thank you. Ambassador Kennedy, have you taken advantage of the good offices of the Special Inspector General for Iraq or the General Accountability Office, or both, at the outset here of your venture, for what advice and counsel they may give you and lessons learned on past contracting situations?
Yes, sir. The Special Inspector General for Iraq, the General Accountability Office, the State Department's Inspector General have been engaged in an incredible number of inspections and oversights. I have long lists that I won't bother to read off to you, all the work that they're doing. There are multiple audits and inspections going on, I believe, 2 of them as we speak. So
that's the one area. The other is using them for advice and counsel as you start up.
What we do is we read every single one of their reports and use those as lessons learned for the future.
But you haven't engaged directly with them at any point in time?
The Inspectors General do not like to give advice, because if they give advice, they are then, it's in effect, they feel it's a pass they've given me. I would say, you have told me to do X, I did X, it didn't work, you can't.
Well, that's interesting.
So we use.
I had a different impression from talking to folks over there, but I understand that aspect of it. But
yes.
I do think it's important to glean all the lessons learned that we can.
I read every single one of the reports that they have done on the platform that I have built, my predecessor to build, and we plan to continue, sir.
Thank you.
I have one last question, then I'd give you each an opportunity to kind of cite your biggest concern moving forward. But before we get to that, I'm still concerned about the capability for medical type situations, only 6 beds overnight. Does the State Department have a plan for evacuation should that need to occur? We're talking about 17,000 people here. How do you address that?
We have been working with the Department of Defense and with our embassies in Amman and Baghdad on mass casualty scenarios using both our assets and assets that we might be able to call upon from DoD. There is such a plan being developed. I might point out, sir, the number is not 17,000. It's much closer to 16,000, and I believe that
I feel so much better.
Well. And if you take just the State Department component there, it's actually closer to maybe 10,000, plus my Department of Defense colleagues. So the numbers are all.
When you say 10,000, 10,000 what?
10,000. 10,000 about, I'd say closer to 10,500, 11,000 State Department. Government employees and contractor support, and then there is, as my colleagues at Defense referred to, the Office of Security Cooperation, which is part of the Chief of Missions responsibilities, but they have their own personnel.
As we move forward, would it be reasonable at the end of by the end of the month, could you provide me a specific number then and how that breaks down, so there is no confusion moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, today, if I totaled up everything, the answer for State and OSCI is 16,009. 009, very good. We track this very, very closely because we have no intention of overbuilding, and I do not wish to underbuild either.
Good, thank you. We start with Mr. Estevez. I just want to wrap up here. We need to be brief, but your biggest concern moving forward, the thing that we have to achieve and tackle by the end of the year?
Well, under the current scenario of drawing down to zero, aside from the OSCI presence in Iraq, it's a massive logistical move. 43,000 folks in about 2.5 months, about 800,000 pieces of equipment to come out, actually more close to 850,000. So from a standpoint of logistics, it's a phenomenal piece of work. Now, we've done that. We've been doing this over the last 2 years, really, of drawdown. We're confident we can do it, but there's always hitches in these type of operations. Should there be successful negotiations, turning some of that around is also complicated, but absolutely executable.
Thank you. Ambassador Vershbow.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I think that from a policy point of view, between now and the end of the year, we do hope that we can come to an agreement with the Iraqis on the full dimensions of a long-term security relationship with that country that meets their needs and which also serves our long-term strategic interests. I think that the long-term success of Iraq's efforts to consolidate its sovereignty, its democracy, its stability has become even more important in the wake of the Arab Spring. The Iraqis face many threats, some internal, some external. I share your concern, Mr. Chairman, about Iran, and as Ambassador Kennedy said, they don't necessarily have an interest in stability in Iraq or in seeing Iraq become a sovereign state that determines its own destiny. And indeed, the Iranian-backed militias are likely to continue to pose a threat to security. That makes it all the more important that we develop a strong and robust security partnership with the Iraqis that helps them improve their abilities, which have improved significantly since we basically handed over main principal responsibility to them more than a year ago. But they recognize that they need additional support going forward, and I think it's in our strategic interest to develop a relationship that meets their needs so that we can help them counter these threats and become an anchor of stability in a turbulent and fast-changing Middle East.
Thank you. Ambassador Kennedy.
Mr. Chairman, when we started this transition process, my great fear was that we would not be mission capable to take over the responsibilities given to the Secretary of State under the new system. I believe that today we are mission capable. The remaining task is to complete the physical plant build-out. We have the aviation in place, we have the security personnel in place, we have the logistics in place, we have the life support in place. All our building projects are underway. There have been the normal delays operating in a war zone, from delays getting steel into the country to the U.S. military, we thinking the U.S. military would be off Site X on day 1, and they were off on day 27, and that's not pointing at them in any way. They have been absolutely fabulous in their cooperation. We could not have asked for anything more. But we are now mission capable, but I still have to complete internal and some external build-out of facilities within our compounds.
Very good. Thank you all for your commitment to our nation and our country, and the hard work and dedication, your patriotism. Appreciate the staff that does so much of the work here and helping us along the way. I thank Mr. Tierney, and appreciate that if there's additional updates that you feel sufficient or need to be brought before the committee, we'd certainly appreciate that. Committee now stands adjourned.